In the dangerous barrios of Tijuana, most people knew better than to approach Dante Morales' compound after dark. But what would you do if someone you loved was dying and you had nowhere else to turn? Sometimes desperation makes heroes of ordinary people, and sometimes it leads them straight into the arms of the most dangerous men alive. Isabella stood at the iron gates, her 8-year-old sister Sophia unconscious in her arms, and knew she was about to cross a line she could never uncross. The guards stared at her through the bars like she was something that had crawled out of their nightmares. A young woman, alone, holding a dying child at midnight outside the most feared compound in the city. She must be either incredibly brave or completely insane. 3 weeks ago, Isabella Reyes had been just another hard-working girl trying to make ends meet in the sprawling barrios of Tijuana. At 24, she worked double shifts at the textile factory during the day and cleaned offices at night. Every peso going toward rent for their tiny one-bedroom apartment and medicine for Sophia. Their parents had died in a car crash 2 years earlier, leaving Isabella to raise her baby sister alone. She had thought that was the hardest thing she would ever face. She had been wrong. Sophia had collapsed 3 days ago while getting ready for school. One moment she was chattering about her friend Maria's birthday party. The next she was unconscious on their kitchen floor, blood trickling from her nose. The emergency room doctor at the public hospital had run test after test, his expression growing grimmer with each result. Acute myeloid leukemia, he had finally told Isabella in a voice that tried to be gentle but could not hide the death sentence behind the words. Without immediate treatment at a private facility with proper equipment, Sophia had weeks to live, maybe days. The treatment would cost 50,000 American dollars. Isabella made $300 a month. She had spent the last 3 days in a frantic blur of desperation. Borrowed against future paychecks, begged relatives who had nothing to give, even considered selling herself to the wealthy businessmen who sometimes cruised the factory district looking for young women. Nothing came close to the impossible sum she needed. The doctors kept Sophia comfortable with pain medication, but Isabella could see her sister fading a little more each hour. That was when her neighbor, old Maria Santos, had whispered a name that most people feared to speak aloud. Dante Morales, the youngest cartel boss in Tijuana history, known for his ruthless efficiency and iron control over the eastern territories. But also, Maria had added with nervous glances toward the windows, known for occasionally helping local families in desperate situations. No one knew why he did it, or how he chose who to help. Some said it was guilt over his bloody rise to power. Others claimed he was building loyalty in case he ever needed to disappear into the community. Isabella did not care about his motivations. She only cared that he might save Sophia. Finding his compound had been easier than expected. Everyone knew where Dante Morales lived. They just pretended not to for their own safety. The fortress sat on a hill overlooking the barrio, all high walls and security cameras, with guards who killed first and asked questions never. Isabella had spent an entire day watching the compound from a distance, studying the guard rotations and looking for any sign of weakness or opportunity. She had found none. There was no sneaking into Dante Morales' territory. There was only walking up to his front gate and hoping he was feeling merciful. Now, with Sophia burning with fever in her arms and time running out like sand through an hourglass, Isabella stepped close enough to the iron bars that she could smell the cigarette smoke on the guard's breath. The man was enormous, with neck tattoos that marked him as a veteran soldier in Dante's organization. His hand rested casually on the grip of his pistol as he looked her up and down with the kind of assessment that made her skin crawl. "I need to see Dante Morales," Isabella said, her voice steadier than she felt. Her heart was hammering so hard she was sure the guards could hear it. But she kept her chin raised and met the man's stare without flinching. The guard laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You need to see the boss. You and every other person in this city who thinks they can just show up here with their problems. What makes you special, girl?" "My sister is dying," Isabella replied simply. "I have nowhere else to go." Something in her tone must have given him pause because his laughter died. He stepped closer to the gate, studying Sophia's pale face and the way her small body seemed to have no weight at all in Isabella's arms. The second guard, younger but with eyes that had seen too much violence, whispered something urgent in his partner's ear. "Boss does not like being disturbed after midnight," the older guard said. but his voice had lost some of its mockery. Especially not by strangers. Then I will wait until morning, Isabella said. Sophia gave a small whimper in her sleep, and Isabella adjusted her grip to hold her sister more securely. But I am not leaving. Not until he speaks with me. The guards exchanged a long look. Isabella could practically see the calculations running through their minds. A young woman with a sick child was hardly a threat, but Dante Morales had not lived this long by being careless about security. On the other hand, turning away someone in genuine desperate need could anger their boss if he learned about it later. Everyone knew Dante's unpredictable moods when it came to civilians in crisis. Finally, the older guard pulled out a radio and spoke rapidly in Spanish, too fast and quiet for Isabella to follow. She caught only fragments, something about a girl with a sick sister and a request for guidance. The response crackled through the radio in a voice she could not quite make out, but the guard's expression shifted from annoyance to surprise. "The boss will see you," he said, sounding like he could not quite believe the words leaving his mouth. "But any sudden movements and you are dead where you stand." "Understood." Isabella nodded, not trusting her voice. The gate swung open with a metallic groan that seemed to echo through the night like a warning. As she stepped through, she felt the weight of crossing an invisible line between the normal world and something far more dangerous. The compound's courtyard was larger than it had appeared from the street, with manicured gardens that seemed incongruous next to the armed men patrolling the perimeter. Isabella had expected something like a fortress, all concrete and steel. Instead, she found herself walking toward a sprawling hacienda-style house, with warm lights spilling from tall windows. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest tight with the reminder of everything Sophia would never have if Isabella failed tonight. The guards flanked her as they approached the main house, their weapons visible but not directly threatening. Isabella tried to memorize every detail in case she somehow survived this encounter and needed to describe it later. The fountain in the center of the courtyard. The way the bougainvillea climbed the white stucco walls. The sound her shoes made on the flagstone path. She wanted to remember it all, in case these were the last beautiful things Sophia ever saw. They reached a massive wooden door carved with intricate patterns that probably cost more than Isabella made in a year. Before the guards could knock, the door swung open from within. The man who appeared in the doorway made Isabella's breath catch in her throat. Dante Morales was not what she had expected. The stories painted him as a monster, all scars and cold eyes and casual cruelty. The reality was far more dangerous. He was tall and lean, probably in his early 30s, with the kind of controlled grace that came from years of violence barely held in check. His dark hair was perfectly styled despite the late hour, and his clothes were expensive casual or that somehow managed to look more intimidating than any armor. But it was his eyes that made Isabella's stomach flip over. They were dark and intelligent and completely unreadable, studying her with the kind of attention that suggested he missed nothing. This was a man who could have anything he wanted in the world, Isabella realized with growing desperation. What could she possibly offer him that would matter? "You wanted to see me," he said. His voice was quiet but carried easily in the night air, with just a trace of an accent that suggested expensive education layered over street origins. Isabella took a breath that felt like swallowing glass. "Yes, my sister needs help, and I heard you sometimes help people in the community." Dante's gaze dropped to Sophia, and something flickered across his features too quickly for Isabella to interpret. When he looked back up, his expression was neutral again. What kind of help? This was it. The moment that would either save Sophia's life or get them both killed. Isabella met Dante's unreadable gaze and spoke the words that would change everything. "I need $50,000 to save my sister, and I will do anything for it." The silence that followed felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Dante's eyes never left her face as seconds stretched into eternity. Finally, he stepped back from the doorway. "Come inside," he said simply. "We need to talk." Dante had been expecting another desperate plea for money, maybe a mother begging for her son's life after the boy had crossed the wrong people. He had not been expecting this. A young woman who looked like she belonged in a university classroom rather than his world of violence, holding a dying child with the fierce protectiveness of a lioness. Her dark eyes blazed with determination that should have been impossible given her obvious exhaustion and fear. I need $50,000 to save my sister, and I will do anything for it." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Dante found himself studying her face, searching for the calculation or manipulation he was used to seeing in people who came to him for help. Instead, he saw only raw desperation tempered by a courage that made something twist in his chest. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or expensive clothes. All natural grace and striking features that would have made men notice her even if she had not been standing at his door at midnight. This was dangerous territory. Dante had survived in his world by never letting emotion cloud his judgment, by treating every interaction as a potential threat or opportunity. But something about Isabella Reyes made his carefully constructed defenses feel suddenly fragile. The child in her arms stirred, making a small sound of pain that seemed to echo through the courtyard. That decided it. "Miguel," Dante said to his head of security without taking his eyes off Isabella. "Call Dr. Martinez. Tell him I need him here immediately, full medical equipment. And have Rosa prepare the blue suite." Miguel's eyebrows rose slightly. The blue suite was reserved for family, not strangers from the street. But he had worked for Dante long enough to know better than to question orders in front of outsiders. "See, Chief. Right away." As Miguel spoke rapidly into his radio, Dante stepped aside to let Isabella enter. She hesitated for just a moment, as if crossing his threshold meant more than simply seeking shelter. She was right, of course. Nothing would be the same after this night. Isabella stepped into the house and immediately felt overwhelmed. The entrance hall was larger than her entire apartment, with polished marble floors and artwork that probably cost more than she would earn in a lifetime. A crystal chandelier cast warm light over everything, making the space feel more like a luxury hotel than the home of a dangerous criminal. She clutched Sophia closer, trying not to let her awe show on her face. "Your sister needs immediate attention," Dante said, his voice gentler than she had expected. "My doctor will be here shortly. He is very good at his job." "Why are you helping us?" Isabella asked, the question tumbling out before she could stop herself. "You do not know us. We have nothing to offer you." Dante was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. "Sometimes help is its own reward," he said finally. "Come, let me show you where your sister can rest." He led her through a series of rooms that felt like walking through a magazine. Everything was elegant and expensive, from the handcrafted furniture to the oil paintings on the walls. Isabella caught glimpses of a living room with floor-to-ceiling windows, a dining room with a table that could seat 20 people, and a kitchen that belonged in a five-star restaurant. This was wealth beyond anything she had imagined, and it made her feel small and out of place. "You live here alone?" she asked as they climbed a curved staircase to the second floor. "Mostly," Dante replied. "I have staff, but they live in separate quarters. Privacy is important in my line of work." The second floor was just as impressive as the first, with a long hallway lined with doors and more artwork than Isabella could take in. Dante stopped at a door near the end of the hall and opened it to reveal a bedroom that took her breath away. The room was decorated in soft blues and whites, with a king-sized bed, sitting area, and French doors that opened onto a private balcony. The bathroom visible through another doorway looked like it belonged in a luxury spa. "This is where you and your sister will stay," Dante said, watching Isabella's expression carefully. "There are fresh clothes in the wardrobe that should fit you both. Food whenever you want it. Anything you need." Isabella stood frozen in the doorway, Sophia's weight suddenly feeling overwhelming in her arms. "This is too much," she whispered. "I cannot accept charity like this." "It is not charity," Dante said firmly. "It is an investment. Your sister gets the treatment she needs. You both stay safe while she recovers, and when she is better, we will discuss how you can repay me." The way he said it made Isabella's stomach clench with sudden fear. What kind of repayment was he expecting? But before she could ask, footsteps echoed in the hallway, and an older man appeared in the doorway carrying a large medical bag. "Dr. Martinez," Dante said by way of introduction. "He will take excellent care of your sister." Dr. Martinez was probably in his 60s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the gentle manner of someone who had spent his life healing rather than hurting. He moved immediately to Isabella, his attention focused entirely on Sophia. "What are her symptoms?" he asked as he guided Isabella to lay Sophia on the massive bed. "When did they begin?" Isabella found herself answering a rapid series of medical questions while Dr. Martinez examined Sophia with practiced efficiency. The little girl stirred occasionally but did not wake, her breathing shallow and labored. Isabella held her breath as the doctor checked Sophia's pulse, looked in her eyes with a small flashlight, and listened to her heart with a stethoscope. "I will need to run tests," Dr. Martinez said finally, his expression serious but not hopeless. "But her vital signs are stable. With proper treatment, there is every reason for optimism." Isabella felt tears spring to her eyes for the first time since this nightmare had begun. "Thank you," she whispered. "I will have my equipment here within the hour," Dr. Martinez continued, packing his initial supplies back into his bag. "Until then, she needs rest and fluids. I will start in 4 to help with the dehydration." As the doctor worked to set up a temporary 4-line, Isabella became aware that Dante had been standing quietly by the window, watching without interfering. There was something almost tender in his expression as he looked at Sophia, a softness that seemed completely at odds with his reputation. "You should eat something," he said when Dr. Martinez finished his preliminary treatment. "When was the last time you had a proper meal?" Isabella tried to remember and realized she had been surviving on coffee and whatever free food the hospital cafeteria offered to family members of patients. "I am not hungry," she lied. Dante's smile was small but genuine. "Rosa has already prepared something. She would be insulted if you did not at least try it." An hour later, Isabella found herself sitting at a small table on the bedroom balcony, picking at a plate of food that was better than anything she had eaten in months. Dante sat across from her with his own plate, though she noticed he ate very little. Sophia was sleeping peacefully under Dr. Martinez's careful supervision, her color already better with the 4 fluids. "Tell me about your sister," Dante said quietly. "What is she like when she is not sick?" Isabella felt a small smile tug at her lips despite everything. "She is fearless, always asking questions, always getting into trouble. She wants to be a teacher when she grows up, so she can help other children learn to read. She reads to me sometimes, when I come home from work. Her favorite books are the ones about princesses who save themselves." Dante's expression softened. "She sounds remarkable." "She is," Isabella said simply. "She is the best person I know." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the night air warm around them and the lights of the city spreading out below. Isabella found herself studying Dante's profile in the soft light, trying to reconcile the gentle man sharing dinner with her with the dangerous reputation that had brought her here. "Why do you do this?" she asked finally. "Help people, I mean. It cannot be profitable." Dante was quiet for so long Isabella thought he would not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, as if he were choosing each word deliberately. "I grew up not far from where you live now. I know what it feels like to watch someone you love suffer because you do not have enough money to save them. Perhaps I helped because no one helped me when I needed it most." Isabella felt something shift inside her chest, a dangerous softening toward this man who had every reason to be hard and cruel, but had chosen instead to save a stranger's dying sister. She was in trouble, she realized dimly. The kind of trouble that had nothing to do with cartels or money and everything to do with the way her heart raced when Dante looked at her. After dinner, Dante insisted on checking on Sophia one more time before Isabella settled in for the night. He moved quietly to the bedside, his expression serious as he studied the little girl's sleeping face. Sophia looked so small in the massive bed, but her breathing was deeper and more regular than it had been in days. "She will be safe here," Dante said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I give you my word." Isabella watched him watch Sophia and felt something dangerous blooming in her chest. This was not the monster she had expected to find. This was a man who kept his word, who treated a dying child with infinite gentleness, who offered sanctuary without asking for anything in return. At least, not yet. "Thank you," Isabella whispered, the words inadequate for everything he had done. "I do not know how to repay this kindness." Dante turned to look at her, and in the soft lamplight, his eyes seemed less dangerous and more simply human. "Get some rest," he said gently. "Tomorrow we will worry about everything else. Tonight, your sister is safe, and that is enough." As he left them alone, Isabella curled up in the chair beside Sophia's bed and tried to process everything that had happened. 6 hours ago, she had been a desperate woman with no options and a dying sister. Now she was in the home of one of the most dangerous men in Mexico, and instead of fear, she felt something that terrified her even more. She felt hope. Isabella woke to sunlight streaming through windows that were larger than the entire wall of her old apartment. For a confused moment, she could not remember where she was or why the bed felt like sleeping on a cloud. Then reality crashed back and she bolted upright, her heart hammering as she looked around the elegant blue bedroom that had become their sanctuary. Sophia was still sleeping peacefully in the massive bed, her color better than it had been in weeks. The four-line Dr. Martinez had placed was working steadily, and Isabella could see that her sister's breathing was deeper and more regular. For the first time in days, Sophia looked like a child resting rather than a patient fighting for her life. Isabella stretched muscles stiff from sleeping in the chair and tried to process her new reality. She was living in the home of Dante Morales, one of the most dangerous men in Mexico. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt safer than she had since her parents died, which made absolutely no sense and scared her in an entirely different way. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," Isabella called softly, not wanting to wake Sophia. A woman in her 50s entered carrying a breakfast tray that smelled incredible. She was small and compact with graying hair and kind eyes that reminded Isabella of her own mother. "Good morning. I am Rosa," the woman said with a warm smile. "Senor Dante thought you might be hungry. How is the little one?" "Much better," Isabella replied, accepting the tray gratefully. "Thank you for this. You did not need to bring it up here." Rosa waved away her protests. "It is no trouble. Senor Dante, he worries about you both. He asked me to make Sophia's favorite breakfast when she wakes up. What is she like?" Isabella felt something warm and unexpected bloom in her chest. He was thinking about Sophia's preferences, planning ahead for her comfort. "Pancakes," she said softly. "With strawberries if you have them." Rosa beamed. "Of course we have strawberries. I will prepare them now. And you, what would you like for lunch?" Before Isabella could protest that she had already received too much kindness, Rosa was bustling back toward the door with promises of strawberry pancakes and fresh orange juice for Sophia. Isabella had barely finished her breakfast when another soft knock announced Dr. Martinez's arrival for Sophia's morning examination. The older doctor was thorough and gentle, checking vitals and adjusting medication while Sophia dozed. When he finished, his smile told Isabella everything she needed to know before he spoke. "She is responding beautifully to treatment," he said as he packed his equipment. "Her white cell count is already improving. With continued care, I expect a full recovery." Isabella felt tears of relief spring to her eyes. "How long before she is completely well?" Another week of intensive treatment, then several months of monitoring and maintenance medication, Dr. Martinez explained. But the worst is behind her. When Dr. Martinez left, Isabella found herself alone with her thoughts and the weight of everything Dante had done for them. The medical treatment alone was worth tens of thousands of dollars, and he had provided it without hesitation or discussion of payment. The room, the food, the care, all of it freely given to two strangers who had appeared at his door in the middle of the night. She had to find a way to repay him. Isabella was still wrestling with this problem when Sophia finally woke up, looking more alert than she had in days. The little girl's eyes widened as she took in their surroundings, the elegant room and comfortable bed so different from their tiny apartment. "Isabella, where are we?" Sophia asked, her voice still weak but curious. "We are staying with someone who is helping us," Isabella explained carefully. "His name is Dante, and he made sure you got the medicine you need." Sophia nodded solemnly, processing this information with the serious consideration she gave to everything important. "Is he nice?" "Yes," Isabella said, and realized she meant it completely. "He is very nice." When Dante knocked and entered with Rosa's promised strawberry pancakes, Sophia's face lit up with delight. The man who commanded fear throughout the city knelt beside the bed to properly introduce himself to an 8-year-old girl, his voice gentle and patient as he asked about her favorite books and whether the pancakes tasted right. Isabella watched this interaction with growing amazement. There was nothing calculated or performed about Dante's kindness toward Sophia. He genuinely enjoyed talking with her, answering her endless questions about his house and the pretty fountain in the courtyard she could see from their window. "Can I see the fountain?" Sophia asked hopefully. Isabella said I should not get out of bed, but but it looks so pretty. Dr. Martinez says you need to rest today, Dante explained seriously. But perhaps tomorrow, if you are feeling stronger, we can take a walk in the garden. Sophia beamed at this promise, and Isabella felt her heart do something complicated as she watched Dante ruffle her sister's hair with infinite gentleness. After Sophia fell back asleep, Dante invited Isabella to join him for lunch on the main terrace. She hesitated, still feeling out of place in his world, but he waited patiently until she accepted. The terrace overlooked the city with a view that probably cost more than most people made in a year. Isabella tried not to stare at the infinity pool and perfectly manicured gardens as Dante led her to a table set for two under a pergola covered with flowering vines. "This is beautiful," Isabella said softly as they settled into their seats. "I am glad you like it," Dante replied. "I find I enjoy it more when someone else appreciates it as well." There was something in his tone that made Isabella look at him more closely. Despite all the luxury surrounding him, despite the obvious wealth and power at his disposal, he seemed lonely. It was a feeling she recognized all too well from the years of raising Sophia alone. Over lunch, Isabella tried again to discuss repayment for everything he was doing for them. "I cannot just accept all this without giving something back," she insisted. "There must be work I can do, some way to help." Dante's expression grew serious. "Isabella, what I do for a living is dangerous. The people I work with, the business I conduct, none of it is appropriate for someone like you to be involved with. Then let me clean your house, or help in the kitchen, or organize your files," Isabella pressed. "I am good with numbers. I could help with bookkeeping for your legitimate businesses." Dante paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. "What makes you think I have legitimate businesses?" Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I do not know. I just assumed. Someone with your resources must have investments, properties, things that require normal business management." To her surprise, Dante smiled. "You are right, actually. I do have several legitimate operations. Would you like to see them?" That afternoon, Dante took Isabella on a tour that completely changed her understanding of who he was. They visited a community center in the heart of the barrio where children received free meals and tutoring after school. They stopped at a clinic that provided medical care to families who could not afford private doctors. They toured a job training facility where young men learned trades that offered alternatives to gang life. All of it funded by Dante Morales. "I do not understand," Isabella said as they stood in the community center watching children play safely in a space that felt like an oasis in the middle of urban poverty. "Why do you do this? It must cost a fortune." Dante was quiet for a long moment, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched a group of kids Sophia's age working on homework with volunteer tutors. "I was not much older than Sophia when my mother died," he said finally. "My father was already deep in cartel business, and there was no one to take care of me. I learned to survive on the streets, to fight for everything I needed. By the time I was 15, I was running drugs just to eat." Isabella felt something clench in her chest as she imagined Dante as a lost child, alone and desperate just as she had been 3 nights ago. "I swore that when I had the power to change things, I would make sure other children did not face the same choices I did," Dante continued. "The cartel business funds these programs, but these programs are why the cartel business matters." Isabella stared at him, trying to reconcile everything she thought she knew about organized crime with the man standing beside her. "You help people." "I try to," Dante said simply. "I do not pretend to be a good man, Isabella. I have done things that would horrify you. But I have also tried to build something that matters, something that outlasts the violence." As they walked back through the community center, Isabella found herself seeing Dante in an entirely new light. Yes, he was dangerous. Yes, he lived in a world of violence and moral ambiguity. But he was also a man who used his power to protect children, who funded medical clinics and educational programs, who had saved Sophia's life without asking for anything in return. That evening, Isabella sat beside Sophia's bed while Dante read to her from a children's book about a brave princess who rescued her kingdom from an evil sorcerer. Sophia hung on every word, occasionally asking questions that made Dante smile in ways that transformed his entire face. Watching them together, Isabella felt her carefully maintained emotional distance beginning to crumble. This was not the monster she had expected to find. This was a man who read bedtime stories with genuine enjoyment, who remembered that strawberries were Sophia's favorite, who had built an empire partly so he could save children like the one he used to be. She was falling for him, and that realization terrified her more than any physical danger ever could. Later, after Sophia had fallen asleep, Isabella walked with Dante through his gardens in the soft evening air. The fountain Sophia had admired from the window was even more beautiful up close, with lights that made the water sparkle like diamonds. "Thank you," Isabella said as they paused beside the fountain, "for everything you have done for us. I know I keep saying it, but I do not think you understand how much it means." "I understand more than you think," Dante replied quietly. "I know what it feels like to be desperate and alone." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the sound of the fountain and the distant city creating a peaceful backdrop. Isabella was acutely aware of Dante's presence beside her, the way the moonlight highlighted his profile and made his dark eyes seem even more intense. When Sophia stirred restlessly back in the room and Isabella rushed to check on her, Dante followed. Sophia had developed a slight fever, nothing dangerous according to Dr. Martinez when they called him, but enough to make her uncomfortable. Isabella pressed her hand to Sophia's forehead, checking her temperature the way she had done dozens of times over the past few days. As she leaned back from the bed, Dante's hand came up to steady her, his fingers warm against her shoulder. The touch was innocent, practical, nothing more than one person helping another maintain their balance. But Isabella felt it like an electric shock, awareness racing through her system in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with attraction. Their eyes met in the soft lamplight, and Isabella saw something in Dante's gaze that made her breath catch. Heat, yes, but also tenderness and something that looked dangerously like longing. For a moment that stretched like eternity, she thought he might kiss her. More terrifying still, she thought she might let him. Then Sophia made a small sound in her sleep, and the moment shattered. Dante's hand dropped away, and he stepped back with the careful control of a man who had almost crossed a line he was not sure he should cross. "She will be fine," he said softly, his voice carefully neutral. Dr. Martinez said the fever is normal as her body fights the infection. Isabella nodded, not trusting her voice. She busied herself adjusting Sophia's blankets and trying to ignore the way her skin still tingled where Dante had touched her. "I should let you rest," Dante said from the doorway. "Good night, Isabella." "Good night," she whispered, not looking up until she heard the door close softly behind him. Alone with her sleeping sister and her chaotic thoughts, Isabella tried to make sense of what was happening to her. 3 days ago, her only concern had been saving Sophia's life. Now she was living in the home of a man who was supposed to be her enemy, feeling things she had no right to feel for someone whose world was built on danger and violence. But as she settled back into the chair beside Sophia's bed, Isabella could not stop thinking about the way Dante had looked at her in that moment before reality intruded. Like she was precious. Like she was something he wanted but was not sure he deserved. In another part of the house, she did not know that Dante was having his own sleepless night, or that across the city, Eduardo Vega was learning about the woman and child living under Dante Morales' protection. Some information, Eduardo reflected as he studied surveillance photos of Isabella, was worth its weight in gold, especially when it revealed that his biggest rival might finally have developed a weakness that could be exploited. 2 weeks had passed since Isabella first knocked on Dante's door, and life had settled into a routine that felt dangerously like happiness. Sophia was thriving under Dr. Martinez's continued care, her strength returning daily until she was more like the energetic little girl Isabella remembered. She spent her mornings working on schoolwork with a tutor Dante had arranged, her afternoons exploring the gardens under Isabella's watchful eye, and her evenings convincing Dante to read increasingly elaborate bedtime stories. Isabella had stopped feeling like an intruder in Dante's home. She had found her place helping Rosa in the kitchen, organizing the files for Dante's legitimate businesses, and gradually becoming part of the strange family that existed within the compound's walls. It was the closest thing to peace she had known since their parents died, which was exactly why it terrified her. On this particular evening, Isabella sat with Dante on the terrace after Sophia had fallen asleep, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the city lights twinkle below them. These quiet conversations had become the best part of her day, Moments when she could pretend they were simply two people getting to know each other rather than a desperate woman and the dangerous man who had saved her. "Tell me about your parents," Dante said quietly, refilling her wine glass. "You have mentioned them, but never the details." Isabella felt her stomach tighten. She had been dreading this question, knowing it would come eventually, but hoping to avoid the painful memories a little longer. "They died 2 years ago," she said carefully. "A car accident." Dante studied her face in the soft light from the terrace lanterns. "There is more to that story," he said gently. "You do not have to tell me if it is too difficult." Something in his tone, patient and understanding without being pushy, made Isabella's carefully constructed walls crumble. "They were not just killed," she said, the words feeling like glass in her throat. "They were murdered." Dante went very still beside her, his wine glass frozen halfway to his lips. "Tell me." Isabella took a shaky breath and forced herself to continue. "My father was a journalist. He was investigating corruption in the police force, specifically how certain officers were being paid by cartel members to look the other way during drug shipments. He had been working on the story for months, gathering evidence, preparing to expose everything. The night breeze stirred the bougainvillea around them, but Isabella barely noticed. She was back in that terrible week 2 years ago, reliving every horrible detail. He received death threats, but he would not stop. He said the people deserved to know the truth, that children like Sophia deserved to grow up in a city where the police actually protected them instead of enabling the criminals. My mother begged him to be careful, but he said someone had to speak for those who had no voice. Isabella's hands were shaking now, and Dante reached over to cover them with his own. His touch was warm and steady, anchoring her to the present. "The night it happened, they were coming home from dinner at my aunt's house," Isabella continued. "A truck ran them off the road on a curve near the mountains. The official investigation called it an accident, said the other driver was drunk and fled the scene. But my father's editor found his laptop and notes burned in a dumpster the next day. All his research, all his evidence, gone." Dante's jaw was tight with controlled anger. Which cartel was he investigating? Isabella met his eyes, seeing her own pain reflected there. The Hermanos Vega, Eduardo Vega's organization. The silence that followed felt heavy with implication. Isabella knew she was telling the man she was falling in love with that his world, the world he was part of, had killed her parents. She waited for him to defend it, to explain why sometimes violence was necessary, to justify the system that had made him wealthy and powerful. Instead, Dante lifted her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "I am sorry," he said simply. "Your parents sounded like good people. Brave people." Isabella felt tears spring to her eyes. They were. They would have loved Sophia so much, would have been so proud of the little girl she is becoming. And they would have been horrified by where I am now, by the fact that I am accepting help from someone in the same world that killed them. "Are you horrified?" Dante asked quietly. "By being here, by accepting my help?" Isabella looked at him, really looked at him, studying the face that had become so familiar and dear to her over the past 2 weeks. "I should be," she said honestly. "When I first realized what you do for a living, I was terrified. All I could think about was my parents and how people like you had taken them away from us. And now I see that you are not like them at all," Isabella replied. "You protect people instead of hurting them. You build things instead of tearing them down. You save dying children instead of creating orphans." Dante was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing gentle circles across her knuckles. "My father was like them," he said finally, "like the men who killed your parents. He believed power came from fear, that violence was the only language worth speaking." Isabella waited, sensing there was more. "He started grooming me to take over his territory when I was 12 years old," Dante continued, his voice carefully controlled. "Taught me to fight, to intimidate, to kill when necessary. I was good at it, unfortunately. Very good. By the time I was 20, I was his most trusted enforcer." "What changed?" Isabella asked softly. "I met a girl," Dante said, and something in his tone made Isabella's heart clench. "Her name was Carmen, and she was everything pure and good in the world. She worked at one of the community centers my father's organization supposedly protected. She believed I could be better than what my father was making me into." Isabella felt a stab of something that might have been jealousy. "What happened to her?" "She was killed," Dante said simply. "Shot in the crossfire during a territorial dispute with a rival organization. She was just walking to work, completely innocent, but she died because of the violence I was part of perpetuating. Isabella squeezed his hands, offering what comfort she could. That was when I decided I would do things differently, Dante continued. I took over my father's territory, but I changed the rules. No violence against civilians. No drugs sold near schools or playgrounds. Use the profits to actually help the community instead of just bleeding it dry. It has not made me popular with other organizations, but it has let me sleep at night. Isabella studied his face in the soft light, seeing the pain and regret etched in his features. You still blame yourself for her death. Every day, Dante admitted, just as you probably blame yourself for not being able to save your parents. Isabella felt her breath catch. How did you know? Because it is what good people do, Dante said gently. We carry the weight of things beyond our control because the alternative is admitting we are powerless to protect the people we love. They sat in silence for a moment, both lost in memories of loss and guilt. Isabella felt something shift between them, a deeper understanding that went beyond attraction or gratitude. They were both wounded people trying to build something better from the ashes of their pain. I never thought I would care about someone in your world, Isabella said quietly. After what happened to my parents, I thought I could never forgive anyone connected to cartel life. And now, Dante asked, echoing her earlier question. Now I think maybe the world is more complicated than I wanted to believe, Isabella replied. Maybe some people can choose to be better than their circumstances. Dante turned to face her more fully, his dark eyes intense in the lamplight. Isabella, there is something you need to understand. The way I feel about you, about Sophia, it changes everything. Makes me vulnerable in ways I cannot afford to be vulnerable. Before Isabella could ask what he meant, Dante's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb stroking gently across her skin. She leaned into the touch without thinking, her eyes fluttering closed at the tenderness of the gesture. When she opened her eyes, Dante was looking at her like she was something precious and fragile and utterly necessary. The air between them seemed to crackle with tension as he leaned closer, his lips barely an inch from hers. Isabella's heart was racing so fast she was sure he could hear it. She had never wanted anything as much as she wanted him to close that final distance between them. Her hands came up to rest against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palms. "Jeef," came an urgent voice from the terrace doorway. Dante pulled back with visible effort, his jaw tight with frustration as he turned toward the interruption. Isabella recognized Miguel, Dante's head of security, whose usually calm demeanor was replaced by obvious tension. "What is it, Miguel?" Dante asked, his voice carefully controlled despite the interruption. Eduardo Vega's men were spotted at 3 different locations around the compound perimeter, Miguel reported. They are not trying to hide their presence. This feels like a message. Isabella felt cold dread wash over her as she watched Dante's entire demeanor shift. The gentle man who had been about to kiss her disappeared, replaced by someone harder and infinitely more dangerous. "How many men?" Dante asked, already moving toward the house. "At least a dozen that we have identified," Miguel replied, following them inside. "They withdrew when our patrols approached, but the message is clear. He knows about the woman and child." Isabella's blood turned to ice. Eduardo Vega, the man whose organization had killed her parents, now knew she was here, under Dante's protection. The irony was not lost on her. In Dante's office, Isabella watched him transform into the cartel leader she had heard about, but never truly seen. He stood behind his desk like a general planning a war, his voice crisp and authoritative as he gave orders to Miguel and the other security personnel who had quickly assembled. "Double the perimeter guards," he commanded. "No one enters or leaves without my direct authorization. I want eyes on every approach to the compound, and if Eduardo's people come within 2 blocks of this property, I want to know about it immediately." "What about the businesses?" Miguel asked. "The community center, the clinic, the job training facility. Additional security at all of them," Dante replied without hesitation. "If Eduardo wants to send a message through violence against innocents, he will find it is a very expensive message to send." Isabella pressed herself against the office wall, trying to make herself invisible as she watched Dante orchestrate what was essentially a military operation. This was the side of him she had heard about but never witnessed, the cold efficiency that had made him one of the most feared men in Mexico. and he was deploying all of that power to protect her and Sophia. The meeting continued for another hour, with detailed discussions of weapons placement, communication protocols, and contingency plans for various attack scenarios. Isabella listened with growing horror as she realized the level of violence that might be unleashed because of her presence in Dante's life. When the meeting finally ended and the other men filed out, Isabella found herself alone with Dante in his office. He looked exhausted, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. "This is because of us," Isabella said quietly. "Because you helped us, now you are in danger." Dante looked up at her, and some of the hardness left his expression. "No," he said firmly. "This is because Eduardo Vega is a man who believes fear is the only currency that matters. You and Sophia are just his excuse to start a conflict he has been planning for months." "But if we were not here," Isabella began. "If you were not here," Dante interrupted, "Sophia would be dead, and I would still be the same man I was 2 weeks ago. Powerful but empty. Respected but alone." He moved around the desk to stand in front of her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Isabella, what you and Sophia have brought to my life is worth fighting for. Worth dying for, if necessary." Isabella felt tears spring to her eyes. "I cannot be the reason you get hurt. I cannot lose someone else I care about to cartel violence." The words hung in the air between them, an admission neither of them had been ready to make out loud. Isabella cared about him. More than cared about him. Dante's hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. "You are not going to lose me," he said fiercely, "and I am not going to lose you. Eduardo Vega has made a serious mistake if he thinks he can threaten my family and live to tell about it." "My family." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. They were so unexpected and so completely right. Somehow, without either of them planning it, she and Sophia had become Dante's family, and he had become theirs. That night, as Isabella lay in the chair beside Sophia's bed listening to the increased security patrols outside their window, she tried to process everything that had changed in the space of a few hours. She was in love with Dante Morales. Completely, irrevocably, terrifyingly in love with a man whose world was about to explode into violence because he had chosen to protect her. The girl who had knocked on his door 2 weeks ago out of desperation had become the woman who would fight beside him to protect the family they had somehow created together. The transformation should have scared her. Instead, it made her feel stronger than she ever had in her life. In his own room, Dante stood at the window looking out at the compound he had turned into a fortress. Tomorrow he would have to make decisions that might require him to become the very thing Isabella's parents had died fighting against. The irony was bitter, but unavoidable. Eduardo Vega had made this personal the moment he decided to threaten Isabella and Sophia. Now Dante would remind him why that was a mistake no one made twice. 3 days after Eduardo's men had been spotted around the compound, Dr. Martinez delivered the news Isabella had been praying for since that first desperate night. Sophia's latest test showed no trace of the leukemia that had nearly taken her life. She was officially in complete remission. That evening, Dante insisted on celebrating with a special dinner on the main terrace. Rosa had prepared all of Sophia's favorite foods, and the table was decorated with flowers from the garden and candles that made everything glow with warm light. It felt like a real family celebration, the kind Isabella remembered from before their parents died. Sophia was radiant with health and happiness, chattering excitedly about her plans to return to school and see her friends again. She had grown during her recovery, not just physically, but in confidence and joy. Living under Dante's protection had given her a sense of security Isabella had not been able to provide in their old life. "When can we visit the community center again?" Sophia asked Dante as Rosa served dessert. "I want to read to the little kids like you read to me." Dante's smile was genuinely warm as he looked at the little girl who had become so precious to him. "Soon, Princessa. Very soon we will make sure you can do all the things you want to do." Isabella felt her heart clench at the endearment and the promise behind it. Dante was already planning for Sophia's future, making sure she would have opportunities and experiences beyond what Isabella could have given her alone. After Sophia fell asleep, exhausted from the excitement of celebration, Isabella found herself alone with Dante in the quiet house. The increased security presence was subtle but unmistakable, guards positioned at every entrance and patrol routes that covered every inch of the property. They were living in a fortress, but tonight it felt less like protection and more like a sanctuary. She is completely well, Isabella said as they walked through the moonlit garden. I still cannot quite believe it. Dante stopped beside the fountain, the same spot where they had shared so many quiet conversations over the past weeks. She is strong, like her sister. It would take more than illness to defeat either of you. Isabella looked at him, really looked at him, taking in the face that had become more familiar than her own. The man who had saved Sophia's life, who had opened his home and his heart to two strangers, who was now preparing for war to keep them safe. I have been fighting this, Isabella said quietly. Fighting what I feel for you because I thought it was wrong, or dangerous, or impossible. And now, Dante asked, his voice carefully neutral. Now I think I was a fool to waste time we might not have, Isabella replied. Life is too short and too uncertain to spend it denying what matters most. Dante went very still, his dark eyes searching her face in the moonlight. Isabella, you need to be sure. Once we cross this line, everything changes. There is no going back to what we were before. I do not want to go back, Isabella said, stepping closer to him. I want to move forward, together, whatever that means. Dante's control finally snapped. His hands came up to frame her face as he lowered his head to capture her lips with his own. The kiss was everything Isabella had been imagining and more, gentle and fierce at the same time, full of all the longing they had been holding back for weeks. Isabella melted against him, her hands fisting in his shirt as she kissed him back with all the emotion she had been trying to suppress. He tasted like wine and promises, like safety and danger combined in the most intoxicating way possible. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against hers. Are you sure? He whispered. About this, about us, about everything it means. I have never been more sure of anything in my life, Isabella replied. Dante led her inside, up the stairs to his room, which Isabella had never seen before. It was elegant and masculine, with dark wood furniture and windows that overlooked the city. But all Isabella could focus on was the man beside her, the way he looked at her like she was something miraculous. They moved together with a tenderness that took Isabella's breath away. Dante worshipped her body like it was something sacred, taking his time to show her exactly how precious she was to him. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered endearment made it clear that this was about far more than physical desire. This was about love, about commitment, about two people choosing to become something greater than what they were apart. Isabella had never felt so cherished, so completely safe and valued and beautiful. In Dante's arms, she discovered parts of herself she had never known existed, parts that responded to his gentleness with a passion that surprised them both. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Isabella's head on Dante's chest as he stroked her hair. She felt changed, fundamentally different than the woman who had knocked on his door 3 weeks ago. That woman had been desperate and alone. This woman was loved and protected, and part of something bigger than herself. I love you, Dante said quietly, the words vibrating through his chest. I know it is too soon and too complicated and probably too dangerous, but I needed you to know. I love you too, Isabella whispered back. I think I have loved you since the first night, when you invited us inside instead of turning us away. They talked quietly until dawn, sharing dreams and fears and plans for a future that seemed both impossible and inevitable. Dante told her about his secret preparations for leaving cartel life behind, the legitimate investments he had been building, the exit strategy he had been developing long before she arrived. I want to take you and Sophia away from all this, he said as the first light of morning crept through the windows. Somewhere safe, where we can be a real family without constantly looking over our shoulders. Where would we go? Isabella asked, tracing lazy patterns on his chest. I have property in Costa Rica, completely removed from any cartel business. Houses in Europe under names that cannot be traced back to me. Enough money invested legitimately to support us for the rest of our lives. We could disappear, start over, give Sophia the childhood she deserves. Isabella felt a flutter of hope and terror at the thought. You would really leave all this behind. Your territory, your power, everything you have built here. For you, Dante said simply. For the family, we could be together. None of the rest of it matters if I lose you. They were still making plans and sharing dreams when Rosa knocked softly on the door with breakfast, and the news that Miguel needed to speak with Dante urgently. Reality crashed back as Dante quickly dressed and kissed Isabella goodbye. Whatever Miguel had to tell him, it was not good news. Isabella spent the morning with Sofia, trying to maintain normalcy while her mind raced with possibilities. Sofia was excited about returning to school, about seeing her friends again, about all the normal childhood experiences that had been interrupted by her illness. She had no idea that their entire world might be about to explode into violence. When Dante finally returned to find them in the garden, his expression told Isabella everything she needed to know before he spoke. "Eduardo has sent a message," he said quietly, sitting beside them on the bench where Sofia was reading. "He wants to meet tonight. Just the two of us." Sofia looked up from her book, sensing the tension in the adults around her. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Everything is fine, Princessa," Dante assured her gently. "Isabella and I just need to discuss some boring business matters." But Isabella could see the fury banked in Dante's eyes, could read the tension in every line of his body. Eduardo's message had been more than just a request for a meeting. After they convinced Sofia to go inside for her afternoon rest, Dante told Isabella the truth. Eduardo's ultimatum was simple and brutal: surrender Isabella to him by midnight, or watch his organization tear apart everything Dante cared about. The community center, the clinic, the families who depended on Dante's protection. All of it would burn unless Isabella was delivered to Eduardo's compound by the specified time. "He cannot be serious," Isabella said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He is very serious," Dante replied grimly. "Eduardo has been looking for an excuse to move against my territory for months. You have simply provided him with leverage he thinks will force me to capitulate without a fight." Isabella felt ice-cold despite the warm afternoon sun. "What did you tell Miguel to tell him?" Dante's smile was sharp and completely without humor. "That Eduardo Vega has just made the last mistake of his life. That if he wants a war, I will give him a war. And that if he so much as looks in your direction again, I will personally ensure he does not live to regret it." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of preparation. Isabella watched from the sidelines as Dante's home transformed into a military command center. Maps appeared on every surface, weapons were distributed and checked, communication equipment was tested and retested. Men she had never seen before arrived to reinforce the compound's defenses. Miguel briefed Dante on Eduardo's known resources and likely tactics. "They have superior numbers," Miguel admitted. "But we have better training, better equipment, and we are fighting on our own territory. We also have something Eduardo does not understand," Dante added, glancing toward Isabella. "We are fighting for family, not just power or money. That makes us more dangerous than he can imagine." As evening approached and the final preparations were completed, Isabella made a decision that surprised even herself. She found Dante in his office, studying intelligence reports and making final adjustments to their defensive strategy. "I want to help," she said without preamble. Dante looked up, immediately shaking his head. "Absolutely not. You and Sofia will be in the safe room until this is over." "No," Isabella said firmly. "I will not hide while people I care about risk their lives to protect me. Find me something useful to do." "Isabella, this is not a game," Dante said, rising from behind his desk. "These men will kill without hesitation. I cannot focus on what needs to be done if I am worried about your safety." "Then do not worry," Isabella replied. "Trust me to take care of myself and to help take care of the people we both love." They stared at each other for a long moment, and Isabella saw the exact instant when Dante realized she was not going to be talked out of this. She was no longer the desperate woman who had begged for his help. She was the woman who loved him, who had chosen his world, who would fight beside him to protect their family. "The communications center," Dante said finally. "You coordinate with Miguel and relay information between our security teams. You stay in the house, you stay connected to our people at all times, and if I tell you to get to the safe room, you move without argument." "Agreed," Isabella said, relief flooding through her that he was not going to lock her away like a child. As night fell and Eduardo's deadline approached, Isabella took her position at the communication station Miguel had set up in Dante's office. The radio chatter was constant but controlled, reports from perimeter guards and updates on movement in the surrounding area. Dante appeared beside her as the clock approached midnight. already dressed in tactical gear that made him look like the dangerous man he truly was. "This will be over soon," he promised, leaning down to kiss her gently. "We will survive this," Isabella said fiercely, reaching up to touch his face. "All of us. Together." "Together," Dante agreed, and Isabella heard the promise in his voice. Whatever happened tonight, they would face it as a family. The family they had chosen, the family they would fight to protect, the family that was worth any risk and any sacrifice. Eduardo Vega was about to learn why threatening Dante Morales' family was a mistake no one made twice. Eduardo Vega arrived at exactly midnight with 20 armed men and the arrogance of someone who had never been told no. Isabella watched through the compound's security monitors as his convoy approached the main gate, black SUVs moving with military precision through the empty streets. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands were steady as she coordinated communication between Dante's defensive positions. Perimeter teams report 20-plus hostiles approaching from the east. She relayed through the radio system Miguel had taught her to operate. "All units maintain position until my signal." Dante's voice crackled back through her earpiece, calm and controlled despite the approaching violence. "Copy that. Remember, you move to the safe room the moment I give the word." Isabella did not bother responding to that last part. They both knew she was not going anywhere. Eduardo's convoy stopped just outside the compound's main entrance, close enough to be threatening, but far enough away to avoid immediate retaliation. Isabella could see Eduardo himself stepping out of the lead vehicle, a man in his 40s with the kind of cold eyes that belonged to someone who enjoyed causing pain. He had come to claim her, to drag her back to his compound for whatever revenge he thought would satisfy his wounded pride. The same organization that had killed her parents now wanted to destroy her new family. The irony was bitter, but it also filled Isabella with a rage she had not known she was capable of feeling. Eduardo approached the gate alone, his hands raised in a mockery of peaceful intent. Through the external speakers, his voice carried clearly across the courtyard. "Dante Morales," he called. "I have come to collect what is mine. Send out the woman, and we can settle this without unnecessary bloodshed." Isabella felt cold fury wash through her at being referred to as property. She keyed the radio to broadcast Eduardo's words to all the defensive positions, then waited for Dante's response. Dante appeared on the main balcony overlooking the courtyard, his presence commanding even at a distance. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of authority that had made him feared throughout Mexico. "Eduardo Vega," Dante replied, his tone conversational but with steel underneath. "You seem to have made a mistake. There is nothing here that belongs to you." Eduardo's laughter was like broken glass. "The woman and child are in your compound. That makes them fair game in any territorial dispute. Surely you understand the rules of our business." "I understand that you have threatened my family," Dante said, and Isabella felt her breath catch at the word family spoken so publicly, so definitively. "That makes this personal rather than business. It also makes it your last mistake." Eduardo's pretense of civility dropped away like a discarded mask. "You have 1 minute to send them out, or my men will come in and take them. Your choice whether you want to make this easy or hard." Isabella watched through the monitors as Eduardo signaled to his men. They began spreading out around the compound perimeter, professional and coordinated in their movements. Dante had been right about them having superior numbers, but Isabella could see from the security feeds that they were making the mistake of treating this like a standard territorial raid rather than an assault on a fortress prepared specifically for this moment. Dante's voice came through her earpiece, calm and deadly. "All units, go loud in 30 seconds. Make them regret coming to my home." The next few minutes unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of violence. Dante's men had every advantage of position and preparation, turning the compound's defensive features into a killing field for anyone foolish enough to approach without permission. The superior numbers Eduardo had brought meant nothing when his men were forced to advance across open ground against fortified positions. Isabella found herself in the strange position of coordinating a battle while feeling oddly detached from the violence happening just outside the walls. These men had come to destroy her family, to take her and Sofia as trophies in some twisted game of territorial dominance. She felt no sympathy for them as Dante's defensive strategy systematically dismantled Eduardo's assault force. The real battle was between Eduardo and Dante themselves, and Isabella watched through the security monitors as the two men stalked each other through the compound grounds. Eduardo had managed to breach the outer defenses with a small team, but his men fell one by one to Dante's superior tactical knowledge of his own territory. When Eduardo finally cornered Dante near the fountain where Isabella had fallen in love with him, she held her breath as the two cartel leaders faced each other in what was clearly going to be the final confrontation. "You could have been reasonable about this," Eduardo said, his weapon trained on Dante. "One woman is not worth starting a war over." "You are right," Dante replied, and Isabella could hear the deadly calm in his voice even through the audio feed. "One woman is not worth starting a war over. But my family is worth ending one." The fight that followed was brutal and decisive. Eduardo had come expecting to intimidate and negotiate. Dante had come prepared to eliminate a threat to everything he held dear. When it was over, Eduardo Vega lay dead beside the fountain, and the war he had started was finished before it had truly begun. Isabella was already moving toward the courtyard when Dante's voice crackled through the radio. "All clear. Threat neutralized. Medical teams to positions 3 and 7. We have wounded." She found Dante kneeling beside one of his injured men, applying pressure to a gunshot wound with the same careful attention he gave to everything that mattered to him. His tactical gear was torn and bloodstained, but he appeared uninjured. Isabella dropped to her knees beside him, her hands automatically moving to help stabilize the wounded man. "How bad is it?" she asked. "He will live," Dante replied. "They all will. We were fortunate tonight." As the immediate crisis passed and the compound's medical team took over caring for the wounded, Isabella found herself alone with Dante in the aftermath of violence. The man who had just orchestrated Eduardo's death with cold efficiency was once again the gentle protector who read bedtime stories to her sister. "Are you all right?" Dante asked, his hands framing her face as he searched her expression for signs of shock or trauma. "I am fine," Isabella said, and realized she meant it. "I am not afraid of what you had to do tonight. Those men came here to hurt us, to take Sophia and me away from the people we love. You protected us." Dante studied her face in the security lighting that now illuminated the courtyard. "You are not horrified by the violence." "I am horrified by what would have happened if you had not been willing to use violence to protect us," Isabella replied honestly. "Eduardo would have killed you and taken Sophia and me. Instead, he is dead and we are safe. I can live with that trade." Over the next several hours, as cleanup crews removed evidence of the battle and medical teams finished treating the wounded, Isabella helped coordinate the return to normal operations. By dawn, the compound looked peaceful again, with no outward signs of the war that had been fought and won within its walls. As the sun rose over the city, Dante found Isabella sitting in the garden where Sophia was still sleeping peacefully in her bed, unaware that her entire world had been defended while she dreamed. "It is over," Dante said simply, settling beside Isabella on the bench where they had shared so many quiet conversations. "All of it?" Isabella asked. "Eduardo's organization, the threats, all of it." "Eduardo was the head of the snake," Dante explained. "With him dead, his territory will be divided among other organizations, but none of them have any reason to continue his personal vendetta against us. We are free." Isabella felt a weight she had been carrying for weeks finally lift from her shoulders. "What happens now?" Dante was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was careful, as if he was afraid of her answer. "Now we decide what we want our future to look like. Together, if you are willing." Isabella turned to face him, studying the face that had become more important to her than breathing. "What are you asking me, Dante?" "I am asking you to marry me," he said simply. "To let me give Sophia the father she deserves, and you the partner you can build a life with. I am asking you to help me become the man I want to be rather than the man circumstances made me." Isabella felt tears spring to her eyes as the magnitude of what he was offering hit her fully. A real family, a real future, a chance to build something beautiful from the ashes of everything they had both lost. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, but only if we do this as equals. I do not want to be someone you protect and provide for. I want to be someone you build something meaningful with." Dante's smile was radiant as he pulled her into his arms. "Partners in everything," he promised. "Equal in everything that matters." As they planned their future together in the growing morning light, Isabella realized that the desperate woman who had knocked on Dante's door with a dying child in her arms no longer existed. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had chosen love over fear, family over safety, hope over despair. 6 months later, Isabella stood on the balcony of their new home in Costa Rica, watching Sophia play in the garden with the dog they had adopted from a local shelter. The house was beautiful but not ostentatious, large enough for the family they were building, but designed more for comfort than display. Dante's legitimate businesses were thriving under Isabella's management. The charitable foundation they had established together provided medical care and education to children throughout Central America. Dante had severed all connections to cartel activity, choosing instead to build wealth through legal enterprises that helped communities rather than exploiting them. The transformation had not been easy. Dante's former associates had not initially understood his decision to leave that world behind. But the combination of his reputation for ruthless efficiency and the substantial buyout payments he had offered to former partners had smoothed most potential complications. Isabella placed a protective hand over the small bump of her growing belly, still amazed that they were going to have a child together. Sophia was thrilled about becoming a big sister, already planning elaborate adventures and educational experiences for the baby who would join their family in a few months. Have you ever wondered what would have happened if you had never found the courage to knock on that gate? Dante asked, appearing beside her on the balcony with 2 cups of coffee. Isabella accepted the coffee gratefully and leaned into Dante's warmth as he wrapped his arms around her from behind. Sometimes, she admitted, Sophia might not have survived, and I would probably have spent the rest of my life regretting that I had not tried everything possible to save her. And now, Dante asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, now I know that sometimes the most terrifying decisions lead to the most beautiful outcomes, Isabella replied. I was so afraid of your world, so convinced that accepting help from someone like you would destroy everything good in my life. Instead, it gave you everything good in your life, Dante said softly. It gave me everything good in my life, Isabella agreed. In the garden below, Sophia looked up and waved at them. Papa Dante, she called, using the name she had started calling him after the wedding ceremony that had made their family official. Come help me teach Coco to sit. Dante grinned and kissed Isabella's cheek. Duty calls, he said, already moving toward the stairs. Isabella watched her husband jog down to the garden to help their daughter train their ridiculously spoiled rescue dog, and felt the kind of deep contentment she had once thought was impossible. They had built something beautiful together, something worth fighting for, something that proved love really could conquer even the darkest circumstances. The woman who had been desperate enough to approach a dangerous stranger at midnight had become the woman strong enough to build a life with that stranger when he proved to be everything she had never dared hope for. Sometimes the most terrifying risks led to the most extraordinary rewards. In her pocket, her phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Martinez, now a close family friend, asking about Sophia's latest checkup results. Isabella smiled as she typed back that Sophia remained in perfect health and was already planning to become a pediatric oncologist when she grew up, so she could help other children the way she had been helped. As the afternoon sun cast golden light over their peaceful home, Isabella reflected on how dramatically life could change when you were brave enough to ask for help from the right person. 6 months ago, she had been a desperate woman with a dying sister and no options. Today, she was a wife, a mother, and a partner in building something meaningful with the man she loved. The transformation was complete, and Isabella had never been happier to be wrong about what was possible.